Most scholars call Isaiah the fifth gospel for its message of hope, but they are actively ignoring the blood-soaked pages that predict our exact future. It describes a global cataclysm so specific, it defies logic. Cities burning, the sun turning black. A judgment so terrifying, most churches refuse to preach it. And here's the most astonishing part. Hidden within the texts is a pattern suggesting these aren't just ancient warnings. They are a countdown that has already begun. What if the prophecy isn't about the past, but about tomorrow? Close your eyes for a moment. I want you to strip away the stained glass windows, the quiet pews, and the gentle Christmas cards that usually frame our understanding of the prophet Isaiah. Instead, I want you to step into the dust and heat of the 8th century B.C. to understand why this book is a document of absolute terror. We cannot read it in a vacuum. We have to look at the map. We have to look at the blood on the ground. When Isaiah begins to speak, he isn't standing in a golden age of peace. He is standing on the deck of a sinking ship. The southern kingdom of Judah is crumbling. The stability provided by King Uzziah has died with him. The political structure is fracturing. Corruption is rampant in the courts, and the poor are being ground into the dust by the elite. But the internal rot, as bad as it is, pales in comparison to the storm gathering on the horizon. Have you ever wondered what true existential dread looks like on a national scale? To the people of Isaiah's time, dread had a name. It was Assyria. We often gloss over the ancient empires, grouping them together as just bad guys in sandals. But the Neo-Assyrian Empire was something different. They were the first true military superpower of the ancient world of war, machine of unparalleled efficiency and calculated cruelty. They didn't just conquer, they traumatized. They utilized psychological warfare, flaying their enemies alive and piling skulls at the city gates to ensure the submission of the survivors. Historians note that the Assyrian army was the first to fully equip itself with iron weapons, making them virtually unstoppable against the Bronze Age militias of the Levant. This is the shadow falling over Isaiah's Jerusalem, and here's where the terror of the book deepens. In a time when the people needed reassurance, when they were looking for a divine shield, Isaiah delivers a message that makes the blood run cold. He looks at this invading horde, this army of rapists and pillagers, and he does not call them the enemy. In Isaiah 10:5, he delivers the shocking verdict: "Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath." Do you understand the horror of that implication? Isaiah claims that the most brutal, godless empire on earth is actually a weapon held in the hand of Yahweh. The Assyrians are not invading despite God. They are invading because of him. The terror here is theological. It is the realization that the safety net is gone, and the God of Israel has enlisted the monsters to discipline his own children. But why? Why this geopolitical nightmare? It stems from a catastrophic political failure. As the Assyrian threat grew, the kings of Judah, specifically Ahaz, and later, in his weaker moments, Hezekiah, panicked. Instead of turning inward to spiritual reformation, they looked outward for political salvation. They tried to play the game of empires. They stripped gold from the temple doors to buy mercenaries. They engaged in secret diplomacy, courting Egypt, the splintered reed that would pierce the hand of anyone who leaned on it. Isaiah's terrifying critique is that Israel has traded their covenant with the Creator for a suicide pact with politicians. The terrifying isolation of Judah wasn't an accident. It was a choice. They chose to be a mouse playing between elephants, and Isaiah screams that they are about to be trampled. This creates the atmosphere of doom that permeates the first 39 chapters of the book. It is a poetic gloom, heavy and suffocating. When you read the opening chapter, the description isn't of a majestic kingdom. It is a forensic report of a corpse. Isaiah describes the nation as a body covered in open sores, untreated and festering. The daughter of Zion is left like a shack in a cucumber field, fragile and surrounded by darkness. The poetry is beautiful, yes, but it is the beauty of a funeral dirge. It captures the terrifying reality of a nation that is abandoned its source of life. The cities are burned with fire. The strangers devour the land in your presence. It is a desolate wasteland. But if you think the sight of the Assyrian army is the scariest thing in the book of Isaiah, you are mistaken. There is something far more terrifying than a foreign army waiting inside the temple. In chapter 6, the smoke clears, and Isaiah comes face to face with the real threat of vision, so overwhelming it nearly kills him on the spot. ... Imagine, for a moment, that you are walking into a familiar place of worship. You expect silence, perhaps the smell of incense, or the comfort of ritual. But instead, the roof is blown off, the floor dissolves, and suddenly you are no longer in a building made by human hands. You are standing at the threshold of the intersection between time and eternity. This is where we meet Isaiah in chapter 6, King. Uzziah is dead. The symbol of national stability has rotted away. And in that vacuum of power, Isaiah sees the true king. But what does it actually look like to see the Almighty? Is it a warm light? A comforting embrace? In Isaiah, it is a trauma. First, we must look at the entities that guard this throne. The seraphim. In Hebrew, seraphim literally translates to the burning ones. These are not the chubby, harp-playing cherubs of Renaissance paintings. These are entities of incandescent fire, ancient and terrifying. Deconstruct their anatomy with me. They have 6 wings. With 2, they fly, symbolizing their ceaseless activity in doing God's will. But notice the other 4. With 2, they cover their feet, a sign of creaturely humility, acknowledging they are created beings. And with 2, they cover their faces. Why? Because even the angels, beings of pure spirit and fire, cannot bear to look directly at the uncreated essence of God. If the highest order of angels must shield their eyes from the radiance of the Creator, what chance does a mortal man have? Their voices shake the foundations of the threshold. They cry out the defining attribute of God. They do not cry love, 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 nor powerful, powerful, powerful. They cry holy, 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 holy. In the Hebrew language, repetition is used for emphasis. To say something 3 times is the superlative form, the highest possible degree. This is the only attribute of God mentioned 3 times in succession in the entire Bible. This brings us to the concept of the weight of glory. We often think of glory as something shiny or bright, but the Hebrew word used here is kavod. Its root meaning isn't light, it is heaviness. It signifies weight, substance, and gravity. The presence of God in Isaiah 6 is a crushing weight. It is a reality so dense, so absolute, that it displaces the air in the room. Smo fills the tent pulla, physical manifestation of a holiness that is suffocating too, anything impure. And this is where Isaiah breaks. Standing before this absolute perfection, Isaiah doesn't offer a prayer of thanksgiving. He screams, "Woe is me! for I am undone. The Hebrew word he uses for undone is nidmidi. It means to be silenced, to be cut off, or literally, to unravel. It is a psychological and physical disintegration. In the face of the Kaveda heavy, holy reality of God, Isaiah's self-perception shatters. He realizes that he is a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips. He isn't just saying he used a curse word once. He is realizing that his very instrument of prophecy, his mouth, his communication, the way he connects with the world is infected. In the glare of absolute whiteness, a gray shirt looks black. In the presence of absolute holiness, Isaiah sees himself as a contaminant. Then comes the most jarring image of the vision, the purification. One of the burning ones flies to the altar. He does not bring a cool cloth or a soothing balm. He takes tongs, picks up a live burning coal embers, glowing with the heat of divine judgment, presses it directly against Isaiah's lips. This is the terror of the book of Isaiah. Grace is not a soft blanket. It is a cauterization. To be made ready for God is to be burned clean. The alien nature of the divine is that he is wholly other. He is safe in that he is good, but he is not safe in that he is dangerous to everything in us that is broken. Isaiah survives the encounter, but he is changed. He is cauterized. He is deputized. He is no longer just a man. He is a man who has died to himself and been resurrected by fire. But here is the unsettling truth that haunts the rest of the book. Isaiah was cleansed because he admitted he was broken. But what happens when this heavy, burning holiness descends on a nation that refuses to admit it is sick? What happens when the kavod lands on a people who love their darkness? The burning coal saved the prophet, but for the nation of Israel, the fire is coming not to cleanse their lips, but to consume their cities. The courtroom is now in session. The judge has taken his seat. But here is where the terror truly begins. Usually, when we think of judgment, we imagine a cold, detached magistrate reading a list of rules we broke. But in Isaiah, the prosecutor is not a stranger. He is a father. And his indictment is not just about broken laws. It is about a broken heart that is hardened into judicial fury. God calls the universe to witness a domestic tragedy. He says, I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The terror here lies in the unnatural nature of this rebellion. Isaiah writes that even the ox knows its master, and the donkey knows its owner's manger. Animals, driven by instinct, know where their sustenance comes from. But Israel, they do not know. They do not understand. This isn't just disobedience. It is a spiritual lobotomy. The people have become less than beasts. And because they have disconnected from their source, the rot has set in. Isaiah paints a picture of the nation that is stomach churning. He describes the society as a human body, but one that is critically ill. He says, the whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot, even to the head, there is no soundness in it. Only wounds, bruises, and putrefying sores that have not been closed, neither bound up nor soothed with ointment. Isaiah is telling us that the corruption isn't just in the leadership, the head, and it isn't just in the moral center, the heart. It is systemic. It is total. The political systems, the economic structures, the family units, everything is necrotic. The body is rotting while it is still walking. This is the definition of a zombie civilization, dead in spirit. but animated by greed? But surely they still have their religion. Surely they are still praying. And this brings us to the most shocking part of the indictment: religious hypocrisy. In a twist that should make every religious person tremble. God does not comfort them for their church attendance. He expresses loathing for it. He tells them, "Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me." He says he hates their new moons and their appointed feasts. He says, "They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them." Why? Why would God reject the very rituals he commanded in the Torah? Because their hands are full of blood. This is the terrifying revelation. God is not impressed by our worship. If our lifestyle is predatory, the music, the incense, the sacrifices, it is all noise to him if we are oppressing the vulnerable. God draws a straight line between spiritual apostasy and social injustice. The indictment is specific. He accuses them of failing to defend the fatherless and ignoring the plea of the widow. In the ancient world, and often in ours, these are the people with no legal standing, no money for bribes, no voice. When a society crushes the weak to build wealth for the strong, God stops listening to their prayers. In fact, Isaiah suggests that this social injustice acts as a death sentence for the nation. It transforms the protector into the destroyer. So, the earth mourns. The land itself is described as fading and withering because the covenant has been broken. The moral pollution of the people has physically infected the planet, and in the midst of this carnage, we find the most desolate image of all: the search for a man. Throughout the book, and echoing into Ezekiel, we see God looking for a solution. He looks for someone to stand in the gap: mediator, a righteous politician, a holy priest, anyone who can stem the tide of judgment. But the report is devastating. Isaiah 59 says, "He saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor." God is appalled. He looks at the entire civilization, scanning for one person who possesses the moral weight to stop the collapse. And he finds ... 0. The silence of that search is deafening. It implies that humanity is utterly incapable of saving itself. We cannot legislate our way out of this. We cannot worship our way out of this with empty songs. The indictment is read. The evidence is overwhelming. The head is sick. The hands are bloody. The prayers are rejected. The defense has no one to call to the stand. The verdict is guilty. But if the whole head is sick, and the whole heart is faint, if there is no one to intercede, the sentence. And what happens when the Holy One of Israel rolls up his sleeves to do the job himself? We have walked through the courtroom of history and stood beneath the crushing weight of absolute holiness. Now, Isaiah shifts his approach. He stops shouting like a prosecutor and starts singing like a poet. But do not let the melody fool you. This is where the book of Isaiah transitions from intimidating to heartbreakingly terrifying. Imagine, for a moment, that you are walking through the hills of Judah. You hear music. It's a vintage song, a ballad about a friend and his beloved garden. It sounds like a wedding toast. It sounds like a love song. In Isaiah chapter 5, the prophet begins the parable of the beloved. He sings of a vineyard on a fertile hill. The owner did everything right. He dug it up. He cleared it of stones. He planted it with the choicest vines. He even built a watchtower in the middle of it and hewed out a wine vat, anticipating the celebration to come. The imagery is intimate. It speaks of intense care, investment, and expectation. The owner looks at his creation with love, waiting for the sweet yield of his hard work. But then, the music stops. The tone shifts from romance to a crime scene investigation. When the owner looked for a crop of good grapes, he found only wild grapes. In the original Hebrew, the word implies something putrid, sour, and stinking. The fruit was rotten on the vine. What happens when the God who is love finds that his love has been wasted? What happens when the gardener finds poison where there should have been fruit? This leads us to one of the most chilling linguistic turns in the entire Bible. In the Hebrew text of Isaiah 5-7, the prophet uses a biting play on words. God looked for mishpatei, justice, but behold, mishpatei's bloodshed. He looked for tzedakah, righteousness, but behold, tzedakah, a cry of distress. It sounds similar to the ear, but the difference is fatal. The harvest isn't just poor, it is violent. The Song of the Vineyard reveals that the corruption of the people isn't just a spiritual failing, it is a physical, bloody reality. The vineyard is dripping with the blood of the innocent, and here is the terror. God's reaction is not to instantly incinerate the vineyard with a lightning bolt. No, the judgment described in section 5 is far more unsettling because it is slower. And it is deliberate. God announces the verdict. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. This is the theology of divine abandonment. God does not need to actively destroy you to judge you. He simply has to remove his hand of protection. He tears down the wall. He takes away the hedge. And then he commands the clouds not to rain on it. Suddenly, the vineyard is defenseless. The wild beasts come in. The briars and thorns take over. The desolation is total. The lush, fertile hill becomes a dry, trampled wasteland. It is a terrifying picture of what happens when a nation or a soul is left entirely to itself, without the restraining grace of the Creator. But why? What specific sin caused the beloved to tear down the walls? Isaiah does not leave us guessing. He launches into the woes. And interestingly, the first woe isn't about idolatry or blasphemy, it is about economics and greed. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land. The rot in the vineyard was caused by the greed of the elite. They were cannibalizing their own society, accumulating property, evicting the vulnerable, and expanding their estates until they were the only ones left. They wanted the land all to themselves. God says, essentially, fine. You want to be alone? I will make the land desolate, and you shall be utterly alone in your ruin. The grandeur of their mansions becomes their tomb. Isaiah predicts that 10 acres of vineyard will yield only a single bath of wine, a pathetic trickle. The party is over. The harp and the tambourine cease. The festive noise turns into the silence of the grave. The song of the vineyard begins with the promise of life and ends with the stench of death. It shows us that God's holiness demands justice in the way we treat one another. When that justice is replaced by bloodshed, the protector becomes the destroyer, simply by walking away. But if you think the destruction of the land is frightening, wait until you see what happens when the king himself steps into the room. We have seen the vineyard trampled, but in the next section, we will see the prophet undone. We have arrived at the epicenter of the fear. If the vision of the seraphim in the throne room was awe-inspiring, what we encounter now is earth-shattering. We're stepping into what theologians call the day of the Lord. When you think of the end of the world, what do you see? A nuclear winter? A natural disaster? A silent fade to black? Isaiah's vision of the end is far more visceral and far more terrifying, because it isn't just about destruction. It is about dismantling. It is the uncreating of the world. To understand why the book of Isaiah is the most terrifying text in the Bible, you must understand that for the prophet, the day of the Lord is not merely a battle where the good guys win and the bad guys lose. It is a cosmic intervention that targets one specific enemy: human pride. Isaiah describes a day where everything that is high, lofty, and proud is brutally cut down. He writes of a day against every cedar of Lebanon that is tall and high, against every fortified tower, against every arrogant ship of trade. The terrifying revelation here is that judgment is not just coming for the wicked in a moral sense. It is coming for the self-sufficient. It is coming for the things we built to make ourselves feel safe without God. And then the camera zooms out. It leaves the cities of men and looks up at the sky. This is where the hybrid of poetry and horror reaches its peak. Isaiah tells us that the terror of the Lord is so heavy, the cosmos itself cannot bear the weight of his arrival. Did you know that the imagery of the sky rolling up like a scroll originates here, in Isaiah 34:4? It is a metaphor of finality. When you finish reading a scroll, you roll it up and put it away. Isaiah suggests that the universe, the stars, the sun, the expanse of space is merely a text God has been reading. And on this day, he rolls it up. Isaiah 13 describes the stars of heaven and their constellations refusing to give their light, the sun darkening at its rising, the moon not shedding its light. This is not just an eclipse. This is the revocation of the command, "Let there be light." The structural integrity of reality begins to fail. The heavens shake, and the earth is removed from its place. Now look at the ground. Imagine the wealthiest, most powerful figures of our modern world titans of industry. Political leaders, cultural icons suddenly scrambling on their hands and knees, clawing at the dirt. Isaiah 2 gives us this chilling image. Men shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground from before the terror of the Lord, and from the splendor of his majesty, when he rises to terrify thee. Earth. This is the shocking revelation of the text. The terror does not come from a demon or a monster. The terror comes from the splendor of his majesty. The glory of God, when unleashed fully upon a sinful world, is not comforting, it is lethal. It is a radiation so pure that corruption cannot exist in its presence. And in that moment of panic, we see the end of idolatry. It is a pathetic, desperate scene. Isaiah predicts that in that final hour, humans will cast away their idols of silver and gold, the things they worshipped, the money they hoarded, the technology they trusted to the moles and to the bats. Why? Because in the face of the shaking heavens, our assets are worthless. The things we trusted to save us are revealed as heavy, dead weights that only slow us down as we run for the caves. The stock market, the military alliances, the cultural approval, it is all just scrap metal in the face of the divine fire. Finally, we must confront the scope of this devastation. Isaiah 24 paints a picture of universal ruin. He describes the earth staggering like a drunkard, swaying back and forth like a hut in a storm. It is not a localized judgment for ancient Israel. It is the devastation of the whole earth. The inhabitants are burned, and few men are left. This is the climax of the terror. The prophet strips away every layer of protection we have. our military. Broken, our economy worthless, our planet shattered, and our sky dissolved. We are left naked, hiding in the dust, waiting for the footsteps of a holy God. If the book ended here, Isaiah would be a manifesto of doom, a script for a horror movie with no survivors. The terror is absolute. The darkness is total. But here is the strangest twist of all. Amidst the rolling skies and the staggering earth, Isaiah sees a figure walking through the smoke. Who is the one man who can stand when the very heavens are falling? The answer will change everything you thought you knew about judgment. Now we arrive at the epicenter of cosmic dread. We have walked through burning cities and witnessed the unraveling of nature. But here, in Isaiah chapter 14, the camera zooms in. I want you to visualize a battlefield that has suddenly gone quiet. The noise of the oppressor has ceased. The staff of the wicked is broken. Here Isaiah composes one of the most chilling pieces of literature in human history, the taunt song. This is not a eulogy. It is a satirical, biting mockery of a cosmic tyrant who thought he could outmuscle God. While the passage explicitly addresses the king of Babylon, a historical figure of immense cruelty, Isaiah's language pierces through the human vessel to reveal the dark spiritual power animating him. This is where we meet the day star, the son of the dawn. This is the fall of Lucifer. What drives a created being to believe they can overthrow their creator? Isaiah gives us the blueprint of evil in the infamous 5 I wills. In the text, we hear the inner monologue of this being. It is a ladder of pride, built rung by rung, reaching into the impossible. Listen to the hubris. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Notice the trajectory. Up, up, up. It is the ultimate assertion of the ego. It is the original sin from which all other terrors in Isaiah spring, the desire to displace God. The Hebrew text here uses the word Hallel, translated as Lucifer in the Latin Vulgate, meaning shining one. He is beautiful, he is powerful, and he is utterly deluded. But just as the crescendo reaches its peak, I will be like the Most High. Isaiah cuts the strings. The music stops. The poetry shifts from the heights of the stars to the damp, suffocating depths of the earth. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. The terror here is not just in the fall, but in the destination. Isaiah takes us on a tour of Sheol, the underworld, the realm of the dead. This is one of the most atmospheric and frightening scenes in the Bible. The prophet describes the underworld stirring to meet the fallen king. Imagine the scene. The shadowy spirits of the dead are disturbed from their rest. But these aren't just any spirits. Isaiah says the chief ones of the earth rise from their shadowy thrones. These were the kings, the conquerors, the Alexanders and Caesars of their day who once shook the earth. Now they are merely shades in the gloom. They stand up to greet the newcomer, not with applause, but with a whisper of shock and mockery. Art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? The being who shook kingdoms, who made the world a wilderness and destroyed its cities, is now just another shadow in the dark. The cosmic rebellion, the attempt to storm the throne of God, ends not with a bang, but with a pathetic whimper in the silence of the grave. This passage reveals the frightening duality of Isaiah's vision. the earthly king of Babylon serves as a mask. When the mask is ripped away, we see the spiritual darkness of Satan himself. But even he is subject to judgment. And then Isaiah delivers the final, visceral blow. The hybrid tone of this book, the mix of high theology and gritty. Reality crashes down in verse 11. The pomp, the music of the viols, the golden robes. It all vanishes. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. It is a grotesque image. The Hebrew indicates a bed of maggots beneath, and a blanket of worms above. The morning star who sought to sit above the stars of God is now sandwiched between the lowest forms of life, decomposing in the dirt. It is a reminder that in the terrifying landscape of Isaiah, there is no power natural, political, or supernatural that can stand against the holiness of the Lord. The higher the pedestal, the more catastrophic the collapse. But as the dust settles on the grave of the king of Babylon, a question lingers. If the greatest powers of the earth and the heavens can be crushed like a moth, what hope is there for the common man? If judgment is this absolute, can anyone survive what comes next? The answer lies in a strange, paradoxical figure who is about to emerge from the wreckage, a figure who doesn't look like a king at all. ... Take a deep breath. We have arrived at the precipice. Up until this point in our journey through Isaiah, the terror has been specific. It has been historical. We have watched Damascus crumble, Egypt falter, and Babylon fall. These were judgments against maps, against borders, against kings. But now, as we enter chapters 24 through 27, the camera pulls back, way back. Scholars call this section the Little Apocalypse. And the reason it contributes to Isaiah being the most terrifying book in the Bible is that it suggests something chilling. Judgment is not just political, it is planetary. Have you ever wondered if the earth itself feels the weight of human action? Isaiah 24 opens with a scene of absolute desolation. It isn't just an army marching through, it is the undoing of creation. Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it waste, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. Isaiah introduces a profound theological link between human sign and the literal decay of the planet's ecosystem. The text says the earth mourns and fades away. Why? Because, as verse 5 tells us, the earth is also defiled under its inhabitants. The Hebrew word used here suggests a pollution that goes down to the molecular level. It is a spiritual toxicity that poisons the soil. Because humanity has transgressed the laws and broken the everlasting covenant, the physical world begins to vomit us out. The terror here is the realization that morality and physics are not separate. When we break God's laws, we don't just hurt our souls, we break the machinery of the world. The vines wither, the wine fails, the song ceases. The planet is staggering like a drunkard, crushed under the weight of our rebellion. Then, catastrophe shifts upwards. Isaiah writes that the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth are shaken. This phrase, the windows, from on high should send a shiver down your spine. It is a direct callback to Genesis. It is the language of the flood, but this time, it isn't water that is coming. It is a shaking. The terror of Isaiah is a realization that the stability we take for granted, gravity, the sunrise, the solid ground, is held in place by God's patience. And in this little apocalypse, that patience has run out. However, In the center of this cosmic storm, we find a paradox. We find the death of death. In chapter 25, we encounter one of the most beautiful, yet haunting images in Scripture. We see a banquet. God prepares a feast of fat things, a feast of wine on the lees, right in the middle of this judgment. And at this table, God makes a promise. He will swallow up death forever. He will wipe away tears from all faces. This sounds comforting, doesn't it? But consider the context. For God to swallow up death, He must first destroy the world that is fueled by death. The covering cast over all people, the shroud of mortality, must be ripped away. This is the terror of the holy. As for the cancer of sin to be removed, the surgery must be radical. The terror comes from realizing that for true life to begin, the world as we know it, the world we are comfortable in, must completely end. It is a violent grace. And finally, to ensure this new reality, the ultimate monster must be slain. Isaiah 27 opens with the Leviathan's end. In that day, the Lord, with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will slay the reptile that is in the sea. Leviathan is not just a big fish. In the ancient Near East, he represents primordial chaos. He is the spirit of rebellion, the twisting, knotting force of evil that lurks behind human history. This is the climax of the nightmare. Isaiah pulls the curtain back to show us that our battle was never just against flesh and blood. There is a dragon in the sea, and the only way the terror ends is for the Creator to take his severe sword and slaughter the chaos monster. So, we are left with a banquet on the mountain, a feast of aged wine. But look around the edges of the table. The earth has been shaken. The cities have become heaps of rubble. The dragon lies dead. The relief of the banquet only highlights the severity of the judgment. That was necessary to set the table. We have survived the little apocalypse. The cosmos has been shaken. But now, Isaiah turns his eyes back to the immediate danger, back to the political intrigues of Jerusalem, where a king is about to make a deal with death that he cannot break. The universe has just staggered like a drunkard. But the people of God are about to make a mistake that will bring the Assyrian wolf right to their door. Imagine, for a moment, that you are screaming for help in a crowded room, but sound refuses to leave your throat. Or imagine staring at a page of simple text, desperate for answers, but the words scramble before your eyes into nonsense. We often assume the most terrifying aspects of the Bible are the physical judgments, the plagues, the fires, the armies. But as we descend deeper into the book of Isaiah, we encounter a psychological and spiritual horror that chills the bone marrow. It is not the destruction of the body, but the systematic dismantling of the capacity to understand. Theologians call this judicial blindness. What happens when God, who is the source of all light, decides to turn off the switch? This brings us to the most shocking command in Isaiah's entire ministry. We all know the famous scene in Isaiah. Chapter 6. The prophet sees the Lord on the throne. The seraphim cry, "Holy, holy, holy," and Isaiah volunteers, saying, "Here am I. Send me." It is a beautiful picture of service. But rarely do we pause to read what he was sent to do. The commission is terrifying. God does not tell him to go and save them. He says, "Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes." This is the doctrine of reprobation in its starkest form. God commands the prophet to preach, not to illuminate the people, but to harden them, because they refused to listen when the truth was plain. The truth has now become a judgment. Their rejection was voluntary. Now, their blindness is judicial. It is the curse of the sealed book. Isaiah describes a scenario in chapter 29 that reads like a spiritual nightmare. He speaks of a spirit of deep sleep poured out upon the leadership. The prophets and the seers, the very people designed to be the eyes of the nation, are covered. They are in a catatonic stupor. The revelation of God becomes like a sealed scroll. And here is the terrifying irony of knowledge Isaiah presents. Two men. One is educated, learned, and wise. The scroll is handed to him, and he says, "I cannot read it, for it is sealed." His intellect cannot pick the lock of God's judgment. The scroll is then handed to the unlearned man, the commoner. He says, "Cannot read it, for I am not learned." Both are left in darkness. This destroys the human arrogance that says, "I will find God through my own study," or "I will find God through my simple intuition." When the spirit of slumber falls, the PhD and the illiterate are equally blind. Wisdom divorced from the fear of the Lord becomes a trap. The very education that the leaders of Judah prided themselves on became the mechanism of their confusion. They could parse the grammar, but they could not hear the voice. This blindness leads to the most harrowing statistic in the book: the remnant of the 10th. In modern Christianity, we are often sold a comforting lie of mass revival, where everyone makes it through the fire. Isaiah shatters this when he asks God, "Lord, how long?" Regarding this blindness, God answers with a picture of total devastation: cities wasted without inhabitant, houses without people. But surely there is hope. Yes, but it is a terrifyingly slender hope. God speaks of a tent that shall remain. Imagine a great oak tree representing the nation. God takes an axe to it. He cuts it down. That is the judgment. But then, Isaiah says, even that tenth shall be eaten or consumed again, until only a holy seed remains in the stump. This is a spiritual winnowing so severe that it suggests the vast majority of those claiming to belong to God are actually chaff. The remnant is not the majority. It is the microscopic survivor of a spiritual apocalypse. But if the eyes are blinded and the ears are stopped by God Himself, is there any way to break the seal? Or have we already passed the point of no return without realizing it? Imagine standing on the walls of Jerusalem. To the north, the horizon isn't just dark with storm clouds. It is dark with iron. The year is 701 BC, and the Assyrian war machine, the most ruthless, efficient engine of death the ancient world has ever seen, has arrived. They have burned 46 fortified cities to the ground. They have flayed their enemies alive and stacked heads like harvest grain. Now they are at the gates. But the terror here isn't just physical, it is psychological. Isaiah records the chilling tactics of Sennacherib's field commander, the Rabshakeh. He doesn't shout threats of war. He whispers doubts of theology. He stands within earshot of the starving men on the wall and speaks, not in Aramaic for the diplomats, but in Hebrew for the common soldiers. He asks the question that haunts every believer in the midst of crisis. On whom do you depend? He lists the nations Assyria has crushed. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? He mocks. Have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their countries from my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem? This is the ultimate blasphemy. It is the reduction of Yahweh to a statistic, a local deity on a shelf of broken idols. Inside the city, King Hezekiah is breaking. The pressure is enough to crush a diamond. He receives a letter from Sennacherib, a written promise of an inevitable genocide. What Hezekiah does next is one of the most hauntingly beautiful moments in the Bible. He doesn't convene a war council. He goes up to the temple. Picture the king, stripped of his pomp, walking into the dim light of the sanctuary. He takes the terrifying letter, the death warrant of his people, and he spreads it out before the Lord. He says, essentially, read this, God. They aren't mocking me. They are mocking you. Historians confirm that Sennacherib besieged Jerusalem. His own prison records boast that he trapped Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. But significantly, the Assyrian records never claim he conquered Jerusalem. Why? Because Isaiah steps forward with a word that defies physics and logic. First, God gives a sign to Hezekiah to prove his dominance, not just over armies, but over the fabric of reality. When Hezekiah falls ill and asks for a sign of assurance, we witness the shadow moving backward. The sundial of Ahaz retreats 10 degrees. It is a terrifying disruption of the cosmic order, a reminder that the sun itself is merely a candle in God's hand, to be moved at his whim. If God can reverse time, he can reverse a siege. And then, the sun goes down on the Assyrian camp. 185,000 soldiers. The elite shock troops of the ancient Near East. They sleep in their tents, confident that tomorrow, Jerusalem burns. But Isaiah describes a deliverance that is more frightening than any battle. There is no thunder. There is no earthquake. There is no angelic army clashing swords. There is only the angel of the Lord. One entity. The text is brutally efficient. It says the angel went out and struck down 185,000. When the sun rose, they were all dead bodies. This brings us to the core of why Isaiah is so terrifying. We often fear God's judgment, but this passage teaches us the terror of deliverance. We tend to want a God who is just strong enough to help us, like a big brother. But the God of Isaiah is a consuming fire. To be saved by this God is to realize that he possesses a power so absolute, so silent, and so lethal that he can extinguish the greatest army on earth without waking the neighbors. Imagine the silence of that morning. The people of Jerusalem look over the wall, expecting a charge. Instead, they see a field of corpses. No blood was shed by human hands. The realization hits them. The God who is for them is more dangerous than the army that was against them. The Assyrians retreat. Sennacherib returns home, only to be murdered by his own sons, while worshipping his Adillah final. Ironic twist, confirming that his gods could not save him, while Hezekiah's God could kill without touching a weapon. God has defended his city, but in doing so, he has shown Jerusalem that he is not a tame lion. He is the Lord of hosts, and his protection is as frightening as his wrath. But if you think the sight of a dead army is the peak of Isaiah's terrifying vision, you are mistaken. The prophet is about to look past the physical bodies of the Assyrians and see a spiritual sickness that requires a sacrifice no human mind could conceive. The siege is broken, but the true weight of sin remains. And to deal with that, Isaiah is about to introduce a figure even more shocking than the destroying angel. The suffering servant. Who is he, and why must he be crushed by God himself? We have walked through the burning vineyards. We have stood trembling before the throne, where seraphim hide their faces. We have watched the stars darken and the earth stagger like a drunkard. But now, Isaiah brings the camera in tight. We move from the cosmic apocalypse to something far more intimate, and in many ways, far more terrifying. We arrive at the fourth servant's song, specifically Isaiah 52 and 53. You might think you know this passage. It is the bedrock of Christian theology, the prophecy of the Messiah. But strip away the stained glass and the polite Sunday school readings, and what you are left with is a scene of absolute, visceral horror. If you saw a man so beaten that he no longer looked like a human being, would you recognize him as your Savior? Or would you look away in disgust? Isaiah 52-14 gives us a description that is hard to stomach. The text says, "His appearance was marred beyond human semblance." The Hebrew phrasing here implies a disfigurement so severe that the observer can arguably no longer identify the subject as a man. This isn't just a beating, this is to create a show. It is the systematic dismantling of a human form. The Hebrew word mishat implies a disfigurement that ruins the object, rendering it unrecognizable. This is the first shock of this section. The arm of the Lord is revealed, not in a warrior glowing with starlight, but in a piece of flesh so mangled that kings shut their mouths in shock. He is not the conquering hero. He is a root out of dry ground, possessing no beauty that we should desire him. And how does this figure respond to his own destruction? With a silence that is unnerving. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Imagine the sound of a courtroom or a torture chamber where the accused refuses to scream, refuses to beg, and refuses to defend himself. There is a terrifying stoicism here. He is compared to a lamb led to the slaughter. In the ancient world, the sheep does not know it is about to die. It is silent because it is ignorant. But the servant knows. He sees the knife, yet he offers his throat. This voluntary submission to violence creates a tension that is almost suffocating. Why would the innocent accept the judgment of the guilty? But here is where the terror shifts from the physical to the theological. And this is the part that should make you shudder. Who is doing this to him? We see the Roman soldiers. We see the mob. We see the political corruption. But Isaiah pulls back the curtain to reveal the true aggressor. Isaiah 53:10. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. Read that again. It pleased the Lord. This is the crushing of the innocent. The text suggests that the weight falling upon the servant isn't just bad luck or human cruelty. It is the will of Yahweh. The same God who measures the waters in the hollow of his hand is now pressing that hand down upon his own servant. The word bruise here implies crushing to powder. The theological implication is staggering. The God of justice is pouring out the full cup of wrath accumulated from centuries of human evil, idolatry, and violence into a single, innocent vessel. Can you feel the weight of that transfer? The horror of the substitution. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. This is the violent redemption. It is a transaction written in blood. The peace that we crave, the shalom that Isaiah promised earlier, is purchased at the cost of this chastisement. We are healed, but only because he is torn apart. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality of sin. It cannot simply be waved away. It must be consumed. It must be carried. And the cost of carrying it is the destruction of the carrier. And finally, the humiliation continues, even into death. He is cut off out of the land of the living. There is no hero's burial for the Messiah. Isaiah predicts he will make his grave with the wicked. He is discarded like refuse, thrown into the pit reserved for the enemies of society. It is the total negation of dignity. So why is Isaiah the most terrifying book? Because it tells us that the salvation of the world requires a horror story. It tells us that the only way to fix what is broken in us is for the Creator to be broken for us. The servant lies dead. The sacrifice is complete. The body is buried with the rich and the wicked. The silence of the tomb is deafening. But Isaiah isn't done. The prophet has dragged us through judgment, fire, and the slaughter of the innocent. We stand at the grave of the servant, assuming the story has ended in tragedy. But remember, the very verse that speaks of his death also speaks of him prolonging his days. How can a crushed man see his offspring? How can a dead man divide the spoil with the strong? The greatest shock of Isaiah is not the violence of the death, but the impossibility of what happens next. God, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are holding a raw, wet lump of clay. You can mold it into a beautiful vase, or you can squeeze it until it oozes through your fingers. You can drop it. You can smash it. The clay has no voice. It has no vote. It has no rights. Now, open your eyes and realize, in the book of Isaiah, you are not the hands. You are the clay. We have arrived at perhaps the most philosophically shattering concept in the entire book, the doctrine of absolute divine sovereignty. In modern spirituality, we often hear the metaphor of the potter and the clay used as a comforter. Gentle image of God, shaping us into something beautiful. But when you read Isaiah, the context is not a gentle caress. It is a terrifying declaration of total authority. Woe to him who strives with his maker. Let the potsherd strive with the potsherds of the earth. Shall the clay say to him who forms it, "What are you making?" This is the chilling reality of the right to destroy. Isaiah strips away the human delusion of autonomy. We like to believe we are partners with the divine, negotiating our destiny. Isaiah laughs at this. He presents a God who possesses the absolute right to do with his creation exactly as he pleases. The terror here is the realization that the potter is under no obligation to explain himself to the vessel. If a potter decides a vessel is flawed, he does not ask its permission to crush it back into a lump and start over. The sovereignty of God in Isaiah is not a democracy. It is a monarchy of one. And just when you think you have grasped the extent of this control, Isaiah drops the theological nuclear bomb. It is found in chapter 45, verse 7. In this verse, God declares, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." In the original Hebrew, the word translated as evil or calamity is raw, implies disaster, misery, and woe. I create light and darkness. This is the claim that keeps theologians awake at night. We often try to sanitize the universe by believing that God creates the good, and some other force, perhaps the devil, or chaos, or bad luck creates the bad. Isaiah dismantles this safety net. He forces us to look into the abyss and see that God claims authorship over both the sunrise and the storm. He brings the peace of Jerusalem, and he whistles for the Assyrian armies to destroy it. This leads us to the terror of absolute monotheism. Throughout these chapters, the phrase echoes like a gavel striking a sound block. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Beside me there is no God. Why is this terrifying? Because it means there is no appeal court. In a polytheistic world, if one God is angry with you, you can offer a sacrifice to another god for protection. But in Isaiah's vision, there is only one. If he stands against you, there is nowhere to run, no other power to leverage. You are trapped in the room with the only being that matters. The isolation of this monotheism is stark. It is just the clay and the potter alone in the universe. This creates a sense of the unsearchable mind, an existential dread that human logic cannot penetrate. We want a God who fits into our moral frameworks, a God who acts in ways we approve of. But the God of Isaiah operates on a plane of existence so far above us that his motivations are alien to our intellect. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than our ways. This is the folly of questioning God. Isaiah warns us against the arrogance of asking why. It is the terrifying realization that our logic is finite, and his is infinite. We are characters in a book, demanding the author rewrite the plot, unaware that the author sees the ending we cannot comprehend. So why is Isaiah the most terrifying book? Because it reveals a God who is not safe. He is good, yes, but he is not safe. He is a consuming fire who takes full responsibility for the light and the darkness, the blessing and the calamity. He holds the world not with a trembling hand, but with an iron grip. We are nearly at the end of our journey. We have seen the holy fire, the coming judgment, and the crushing weight of sovereignty. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. If God creates darkness and woe, if he crushes nations, like pottery, is there any hope for the clay? The answer lies in a single, bleeding figure that Isaiah sees through the fog of Tema. Revelation so shocking, it changes the definition of victory forever. We have walked through the vineyard of judgment. We have stood in the shadow of the Assyrian axe and watched the Babylonian cup of wrath overflow. We have seen the suffering servant crushed for iniquities that were not his own. But now, we arrive at the precipice. This is the moment where history does not just turn a page, it burns the book. What happens when the architecture of reality itself can no longer support the weight of God's glory? To understand why Isaiah is the most terrifying book in the Bible, you must look at how it ends. Most people assume the Old Testament ends with a fad Tublak, or a gentle promise. But Isaiah brings us to a vision of cosmic smelting. It is a theological certainty that Isaiah 65:17, "For behold, I create new heavens, and a new earth," is the foundation for the Apostle Peter's later warning, that the elements will melt with fervent heat. This is the melting of the elements. Isaiah envisions a world transformed, not through a gentle evolution, but through intense, refining heat. The holiness of God, which we established earlier as a consuming fire, finally touches the physical bedrock of the earth. Imagine a furnace so hot that it separates the dross from the silver instantly. The old earth, saturated with centuries of bloodshed, idolatry, and broken covenants, cannot simply be painted over. It must be unmade. The terror here is the realization that the world as we know it, the solid ground beneath our feet, is merely a temporary scaffolding destined for the incinerator. The former things shall not be remembered, Isaiah tells us, because they will be utterly consumed by the brilliance of the new. But creation is not just dying, it is birthing. We must confront the birth pains of a new world. Throughout the book, Isaiah uses the metaphor of a woman in labor. In these final chapters, that metaphor reaches its violent crescendo. A birth is a traumatic event. It involves blood, screaming, and a tearing of the flesh to bring forth life. Isaiah describes Zion travailing before she even goes into labor. The transition from the old corrupt order to the new heavens is violent. It is a seismic disruption. The peace that follows is absolute, but the threshold is terrifying. Ask yourself, if the world were to be purified of all evil right now, in this second, how much of your life would survive the fire? This brings us to the most chilling aspect of the final vision, the exclusion of the unholy. We like to think of new heavens as a place where everyone eventually ends up. But Isaiah is ruthlessly exclusive. The terror of the new earth is that it has no quarantine zone for sign. It has no dark corners where rebellion can hide. The text makes it clear that the unrepentant, those who clung to their idols and refused the servant, are left outside the city gates. This is not a passive exclusion. It is an active reality. The new world is a place of such dense, radioactive holiness that an unholy being physically cannot exist there. To enter the New Jerusalem without the robe of righteousness is to walk into a nuclear reactor without a suit. It is not that God is merely angry. It is that He is present, and that presence leads to the eternal flame. In the very last verse of the book, Isaiah says, E vinci quattro. The prophet leaves us with an image that is pure nightmare fuel. The worshippers in the New Jerusalem go out and look upon the dead bodies of the men that have transgressed. He writes, For their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched. This is the paradox of glory. The same fire that warms the sons of God burns the enemies of God. The presence of God is the eternal flame. To those who love Him, it is light, warmth, and illumination. To those who hate Him, that exact same glory is a tormenting fire. It is the inescapable reality of truth pressing in on a lie forever. The terror comes from the fact that God does not withdraw. He fills all things. And for the shadows, the light is agony, and yet we end on the joy that follows dread. Why is this terror necessary? Because without the fire, the cancer remains. Without the violent expulsion of the old, the new cannot remain pure. The poetic resolution of the wolf, lying down with the lamb, of the child playing by the cobra's den, this impossible peace is only possible because the judgment was absolute. Terror of Isaiah is the guarantee of the joy. The fire protects the garden. The dread is the lock on the door of paradise, ensuring that once you are inside, the night can never get in again. Isaiah leaves us trembling, not to drive us away, but to make us desperate for the one thing that can survive the fire, the servant, the Messiah. But as the smoke clears and the new earth rises, we are left with one final haunting question. If the fire reveals everything, what will be left standing when the flames reach you? We have arrived at the end of the road. We have traversed 66 chapters of soaring prophecy, witnessing the fall of Lucifer, the destruction of Babylon, the suffering of the servant, and the glorious architecture of the New Jerusalem. Imagine, for a moment, how you would expect a book of this magnitude to end. You would expect the camera to pan up to the golden city, fading to white amidst the singing of angels. You would expect a happily ever after that leaves the reader in a state of pure, unadulterated comfort. But Isaiah does not give us that comfort. Instead, he leaves us with a scar. The final verse of the book of Isaiah 66-24, is perhaps the most jarring discord in the entire symphony of Scripture. Immediately after describing the eternal worship of the faithful in the new heavens and new earth, the prophet forces our gaze downward, outside the city gates. Listen to the text. It does not whisper. It screams, and they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me. for their worm does not die, and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. This is the final warning. Why would a book about the Holy One of Israel conclude with such a grotesque image of rotting corpses and unceasing fire? To understand this, we must look at the geography of judgment. In ancient Jerusalem, just outside the city walls, lay the Valley of Hinnom. It was a place with a dark history of idol worship and child sacrifice, which eventually became a refuse dump, where fires burned constantly to consume the waste and the bodies of criminals. This valley was known as G-Hinnom. It is a historical and theological fact that this imagery in Isaiah, the worm that does not die and the fire not quenched, is the direct source material for the concept of Gehenna, or hell, in the New Testament. Jesus Christ quotes this exact verse in Mark chapter 9 to describe the reality of eternal separation from God. Isaiah is showing us the origin of unquenchable fire. The worm represents internal decay that never ends, the gnawing of regret and corruption from within. The fire represents external judgment, the holiness of God experienced by those who oppose it. But the true terror of this verse is not just the fire, it is the visibility. The text says, "The righteous shall go forth." And look, this suggests that the judgment of the wicked is a spectacle to all flesh. It serves as an eternal monument to God's justice. In the new creation, the existence of this place of separation serves as a perpetual reminder of what sin actually is. It is the outer darkness cast against the brilliant light of God's glory. The final separation is absolute. There is no gray area in verse 24. There are only those worshiping on the holy mountain and those burning in the valley. This brings us to the ultimate thesis of why Isaiah is the most terrifying book in the Bible. It is terrifying because it dismantles the illusion of neutrality. Throughout the book, we have seen the Holy One of Israel demanding a choice. Trust in alliances, or trust in God. Walk in pride, or walk in humility. Be the clay that fights the potter, or the clay that yields. Now at the very end, the choice is calcified into eternity. The book closes with a stark realization. The same fire that warms the faithful on the mountain consumes the rebels in the valley. God is the fire. To those who love him, he is light and warmth. To those who reject him, he is a consuming fire. The terrifying power of Isaiah is that it respects your freedom too much to lie to you. It ends with the dead bodies of the rebels to show you the weight of the choice you are making right now. It is a book that begins with a lawsuit against rebels and ends with the sentencing of rebels, while offering a miraculous pardon in the middle that cost God his very lifeblood. So, as the scroll rolls shut, the silence that follows is heavy. You are left standing between the mountain and the valley. The vision is complete. The warning has been delivered. The prophet has spoken. The fire is lit. The worm is waiting. But so is the throne. The book is closed, but the question it asks will echo in your soul forever. Which side of the wall will you be on? We have walked through the fire. We have stood amidst the smoking ruins of nations, listened to the shrieks of the satyrs in the desolate wastelands, and watched the very stars rot in the sky. We have stared into the abyss of God's holiness until our eyes burned. So, how is it possible that this, the most terrifying book in the Bible, simultaneously considered the most beautiful, the most hopeful, and the most essential? This brings us to the final, shattering truth of Isaiah's legacy. The paradox of hope and dread. Church historians and scholars have long referred to the book of Isaiah as the fifth gospel. It is quoted in the New Testament more than any other prophet. Why? Because Isaiah understands the physics of the soul. He knows that you cannot truly understand the brightness of the light until you have comprehended the absolute terror of the dark. The gospel according to Isaiah does not offer cheap comfort. It does not offer a God who is merely a benevolent grandfather in the sky, nodding at our sins. No, Isaiah offers us a consuming fire, and the miracle of the shock that awaits the reader at the end of the scroll is that this fire intends to purify us, not destroy us. The terror we have explored in this series, the woes, the judgments, the cosmic dismantling is the necessary backdrop for the greatest hope humanity has ever known, without the holy, holy, holy of chapter 6. The suffering servant of chapter 53 makes no sense. If God is not terrifyingly holy, then our sin is not a tragedy, and salvation is not a miracle. But because the judgment is so real, the rescue is spectacular. Think for a moment about the concept of fear. We are taught to avoid it. We medicate it. We run from it. But Isaiah argues that fear is the beginning of sanity. The fear of the Lord is not the cowering panic of a victim before a tyrant. It is the trembling awe of a traveler, standing on the edge of a canyon, realizing how small they are and how vast the drop is. It is the realization that God is not safe, but He is good. Jesus and the apostles seized upon the terrors of Isaiah to explain the cross. When Jesus stood in the synagogue and unrolled the scroll, He was invoking the same prophet who predicted the destruction of the earth. Why? To show that the God who has the power to unmake the universe is the same God who stepped into history to be unmade by it. On our behalf, the terror of Isaiah finds its resolution in the silence of Calvary. The wrath that shook the mountains, and Isaiah's vision was absorbed by the silent sufferer, the one crushed for our iniquities. The terror was real, but it fell on him so that the hope could fall on us. So, who survives this book? Who can walk through the everlasting burnings and live? In the very last chapter, Isaiah 66 verse 2, God gives us the answer. He looks past the kings, past the armies, past the proud religious leaders, and He says, "But on this one will I look, on him who is poor and of a contrite spirit, and who trembles at my word." There it is, the key to the entire book. God is not looking for the strong. He is looking for the one who trembleth. To tremble at His word is to take God seriously. It is to let the weight of His glory displace the weight of your ego. This is the refining of the soul. Engaging with these terrifying truths strips away the calcified layers of our pride. It shatters the illusion of our control. It forces us to our knees, which, as it turns out, is the only safe posture in the presence of the Almighty. The book of Isaiah is a literary and spiritual crucible. You do not read it to be entertained. You read it to be changed. It scares us because it tells us the truth about who we are. But it comforts us because it tells us the truth about who God is. He is the Holy One of Israel. He breaks in order to bind. He wounds in order to heal. He terrifies in order to save. So, do not close this book and forget the thunder. Carry the awe with you. Let the terror of His holiness drive you to the comfort of His grace. That is the legacy of Isaiah. But be warned, once you have seen the Lord on His throne, high and lifted up, the world will never look the same again. The question isn't whether you are ready to read Isaiah, ... It's whether you are ready to be undone by it. Isaiah is not a relic of history. It is a mirror for the future. It remains the only prophetic book to explicitly detail both the total annihilation of the earth and the birth of a new heaven. Now, the burden of knowledge rests on you. In the face of divine fire, will you be the chaff consumed or the gold refined? Will you count yourself among the holy remnant or the discarded refuse? Do not look away. I challenge you to read the full text with new, trembling eyes. Subscribe now to uncover the biblical mysteries the modern world tries to forget. The warning has been given, but the trumpet has not yet sounded.